Maren Bellrose did not flinch. His hand cracked across her face in front of 200 people, and she did not flinch, did not cry out, did not take a single step backward. The champagne glass fell from her fingers. It shattered on the marble floor. The orchestra stopped. The entire ballroom went silent. And Blaine Wexford, the man who had destroyed her name 6 years ago and was now raising his hand a second time, did not yet know that the Duke standing in the doorway was her husband. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, follow along until the very last word, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The hand came down. The sound it made was not loud. That was the worst part. It was a flat, dry sound, the kind that shouldn't be able to stop a room, shouldn't be able to cut through an orchestra and the clink of crystal and 200 conversations happening at once. But it did. It stopped everything. Maren Bellrose stood with one hand pressed to her cheek and her eyes straight ahead, and she did not move. The champagne glass lay in pieces at her feet. The pale gold liquid spread outward across the marble in a thin, silent circle. She did not look down at it. She looked at Blaine Wexford. He was breathing hard. He had the face of a man born to be trusted, broad jaw, good cheekbones, the kind of steady eyes that made people lean in when he talked. He was wearing a navy coat that fit him the way expensive things fit men who understood that appearances were the first and most important lie. His hand was still raised. "You should have stayed invisible," he said. He said it quietly. That was the part Maren would remember longest. Not the strike. The quiet. "You had one chance." His voice dropped further. "One chance to give me what I came for and walk away. And you chose this." 200 people stood within 40 feet of what had just happened. Not one of them moved toward her. Because she was Maren Bellrose. She was the American relation, the quiet one, the useful one, the woman who organized other people's correspondence and managed other people's household accounts, and had mastered across 6 years of surviving on borrowed grace. The particular art of being present in a room without anyone feeling obligated to notice. She was nobody. Blaine had always known that. He had been counting on it tonight. He raised his hand a second time. "Don't." The voice came from the doorway, one word, quiet as the first. But something in it made Blaine's hand stop in the air like it had hit a wall. Every head in the ballroom turned. Duke Callum Ravenshaw stood beneath the main arch. He was not a man who announced himself. He had no need to. He filled a room the way weather filled a room. You felt it before you identified the source. He was broad and dark, and wore 43 years the way stone wears weather harder for it, shaped by it, not diminished. He crossed the ballroom floor. The crowd parted without being asked. He walked until he was standing 2 feet from Blaine Wexford. He looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then he turned away from him entirely and looked at Maren. "You hurt," he said. The directness of it. No title, no formality. Just the plain western-edged bluntness of a man who wanted a straight answer made several nearby guests blink. "No," Maren said. "Your cheek says different, ma'am." "My cheek doesn't speak for me." Something moved behind his eyes. Quick and controlled, and underneath it not controlled at all. "Fair enough." He held her gaze. "You want me to handle this?" The room held its breath. "Not yet," Maren said. 2 words. They traveled through that ballroom like a match dropped in dry grass. Because there was something in the way she said them. Something in the set of her jaw, and the stillness of her hands, and the fact that she had not once, not when the glass shattered, not when 200 people stared, not now taken a single step backward. Blaine looked between them. The beginning of something moved across his face. Not understanding yet, but the beginning of dread. "Ravenshaw." He steadied his voice with visible effort. "Whatever she's told you, this is a private matter between old acquaintances." "Old acquaintances," Callum repeated. Flat, empty, like he was examining the words and finding them wanting. "There are letters," Blaine pressed. "Old correspondence she's been threatening to misuse. I came here tonight to resolve it quietly." "Blaine." Maren's voice cut across his cleanly. "Stop talking. He stopped. Not because he wanted to, because there was something in her voice he had never once heard there before, and it took him a beat to name it. She was not afraid of him. She had not been afraid of him all evening. That was wrong. That was new. That was not the Maren Bellrose he had built this entire night around the one who would go pale and quiet and ultimately hand over the letters to avoid a scene in public. He had known her for years before he left her. He knew exactly what she was. Careful, quiet, engineered for survival, not confrontation. She apologized before she spoke in crowded rooms. She made herself small the way other women made themselves visible. She had never in all the years he'd known her stood her ground in front of witnesses. He did not understand what had changed. "You struck my wife." The sentence dropped into the room like a stone off a roof. Dead silence. Then, somewhere toward the back of the crowd, someone made a sound. Small, involuntary. Wife. The word moved through the ballroom in whispers that built into something close to noise. Callum had said it without emphasis, without drama, without raising his voice above its usual flat quiet. That made it land harder. Blaine stared. His mouth opened slightly. The color left his face the way water leaves a glass someone has tipped sideways. He stopped, swallowed. "Your wife. That's what I said." Blaine looked at Maren. She held his gaze and gave him nothing. "When?" he said. The word came out thin. "That ain't your business," Callum said. "How long have you—" "Still not your business." Callum tilted his head very slightly. The gesture was almost polite. "You got anything else worth saying, Wexford, or are we finished?" Blaine turned back to Maren with the desperation of a man whose exits are closing one by one. "You can't have told him everything," he said. "You can't have told him about your father." "I know about her father," Callum said. "You know what she told you." "I know what the records show." His voice was still even, still quiet. That never changed, and it was somehow worse for not changing. "I know what a man does when a woman's inheritance disappears and a better opportunity comes along. I know how a man covers that kind of exit." He paused. "I also know what a woman carries when nobody believes her." Blaine went very still. "She told you." "She told me nothing," Maren said. That stopped him cold. She looked at him steadily. He found it himself, the way truth finds its way to the surface when someone is actually looking. 14 months earlier, Maren Bellrose had been living in the east wing of Greystone Hall. She had her own small room, her own small table, and a window that looked out over the kitchen garden that nobody else wanted. She answered correspondence. She kept the household accounts in order. She reorganized things that had been allowed to drift and then quietly retreated before anyone had to thank her for it. Useful women got to stay. That was the rule she had built her life around. She had no savings. No family left that would claim her. No story of her own that anyone in English society was interested in hearing. What she had was a steady hand with numbers, a willingness to work without recognition, and the particular endurance of a woman who has learned to want very little so that losing very little doesn't break her. She had been at Greystone Hall 6 months when she found the problem in the ledgers. The estate steward was a man named Horsman. 40 years with the family. Trusted absolutely. Not catastrophically dishonest. He was too careful for that. What he was doing was small, consistent, and spread thin enough across enough line items that no single glance would ever catch it. But Maren had time. And Maren had a gift for numbers that nobody at Greystone Hall had ever thought to use past the level of balancing the household grocery accounts. She reconstructed 4 years of ledgers on clean paper across 3 weeks of evenings working by lamplight after the household went to sleep. She found the discrepancies. She found where they led. She found the tenant families who were being systematically overcharged families who couldn't read the ledgers that were being used against them and had no recourse and no advocate and no way of knowing they were being robbed by the man they'd trusted for 40 years. She said nothing to Mrs. Cushwell. Nothing to Aldred. She thought about the right thing to do. It was during that thinking that Duke Callum Ravenshaw arrived at Greystone Hall. He came about land a boundary dispute that had been politely unresolved for 2 years. He was there to settle it and leave. He barely noticed Maren. She was seated at the far end of the dinner table, the first night between the wall and the eldest Cushwell daughter, occupying exactly as much space as she needed, and no more. She passed things when they needed passing. She redirected a conversation that was about to go sideways. She was in every sense invisible. Then the table began debating the eviction figures from an estate outside Marlborough. One of the gentlemen stated a number with full confidence. The number was wrong. Maren knew it was wrong, because she had seen the actual records 3 days earlier, because she had done the real calculation, because the error wasn't minor. It was the difference between 31 families and 43. She held her tongue for as long as she could. "I believe that figure is closer to 43, she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "The difference matters when you're calculating whether the remaining tenants can—" The table laughed, not cruelly. Just the reflexive amusement of a room that has not been expecting the quiet woman at the end to speak. "Very good, Miss Bellrose," Aldred said in his gracious voice. She apologized and went silent. Callum said nothing. But after the meal, he went back to the dining room alone, found a piece of paper, and wrote out the calculation she had made. She was right. More than right. Her being right meant the original figures were wrong. The original figures had come from Horsman's ledgers. And Callum Ravenshaw had not become the Duke of Blackmere by ignoring the implications of wrong numbers. He requested 5 years of estate accounts the next morning. He spent 2 days in the records room. On the third day, he asked to speak with whoever managed the household correspondence. He was directed to Maren. She was in the small room off the library, a space no one called her office, because giving her an office would have required acknowledging the work she did there. She was at her table with the reconstructed ledgers spread in front of her when he came in. He didn't knock. "You already found it," he said, not a question. She looked up at him, measured him. He was bigger in a small room than he'd seemed at the dinner table. Quieter too, somehow. Not the quiet of a man being polite, but the quiet of a man who didn't spend words unless they were worth spending. "Yes," she said. "How long ago?" 3 weeks. "Why haven't you moved on it?" She set her pen down. "Because if I take this to Aldred, he goes to Horsman. Horsman has 40 years of this family's trust. I have 6 months. She met his eyes. "I know how that choice ends." Callum pulled out the chair across from her and sat without being invited. She noted it, said nothing about it. "And if I take it forward," he said, "then it gets addressed. That's all you want, for it to be addressed. Those families can't fight back if they don't know they're being cheated." She paused. "Neither can I. Maybe that's why I noticed it in the first place." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted. Not softer exactly, more focused. "What's your name?" he said. "Your full name." "Maren Bellrose." "You're American." "My father was. Massachusetts. He moved us to England when I was 16. She kept her voice even. "He thought it would be a better life." "Was it?" The question was blunter than she'd expected. "It was a different one," she said. He came back the next day, and the day after that. They went through the ledgers together, not socially, not as a gesture toward her, but because she had the clearest picture of what Horsman had done, and Callum needed that picture to be airtight before he moved. He asked questions that were sharp and specific, and treated her answers as though they were exactly as valuable as they were. Nobody did that. Maren noticed it the way you notice something you didn't know you'd been missing. Horsman was dismissed by the end of the week. The tenant accounts were corrected. Aldred thanked her briefly. Mrs. Cushwell called her clever in the tone that made the word a mild criticism. Callum said nothing in front of the family. But the next morning, there was a book on her table. She saw it when she came in a translation of Cicero's letters, the good one, the one she'd have chosen herself if she were choosing. She stood in the doorway a moment before going to it. She opened the front cover. There was an annotation in the margin of the first page. His handwriting decisive, slightly cramped like a man who wrote fast, because his thoughts moved fast. The Latin here is too smooth. Cicero was irritated when he wrote this. The translator has made him dignified. Maren stood at her table and read it twice. Then she sat down. She read the annotation on the second page, then the third. Then she turned back to the first page and read his note again, and she understood slowly, carefully, the way you understand something. You're almost afraid to trust that this was not a gift. This was a question. He was asking her what she thought. Not about the ledgers, not about the estate, about Cicero, about the difference between translation and truth, about whether smoothing a man's irritation into dignity did justice to what he'd actually said. Her hand was slightly unsteady when she picked up the pencil. She wrote in the margin beneath his note, "I wasn't just irritated, he was frightened." The translator made him sound certain because certainty is more comfortable to read. But Cicero knew the Republic was already gone. He just couldn't say it plainly. She left the book on the table. She went about her day and told herself it meant nothing. The next morning, the book was back. His response was beneath hers, 3 lines pressing the argument. That was how it started. Not with flowers, not with compliments. With a dead Roman and a margin too small for everything they needed to say. She told him about Blaine 6 weeks later. They had been arguing civilly, as they always argued, which was to say with full commitment and without cruelty, about a particular translation choice. And the argument had moved sideways into territory. Neither of them had planned to enter, and he asked her somewhere in the middle of it why she had never married. She looked at the window. "I was engaged," she said, "when I was 25. What happened? My father's accounts collapsed. Everything we thought we had turned out to be built on credit and hope, and a few very optimistic assumptions." She kept her voice steady. "He left. The fiancé. After my father died, yes." She folded her hands on the table. "His name was Blaine Wexford. He told everyone I had deliberately hidden my family's financial situation to trap him into the engagement, that I had deceived him." She said it flat and clean, the way you said things you'd repeated enough that they no longer had the power to break you in public. Society believed him. I was the scheming American girl who had tried to trick her way into a good marriage. He was the man who had narrowly escaped. Callum was very still. "He was lying," he said. "Yes. You have proof." It wasn't a question. He had already figured out how her mind worked well enough to know she wouldn't say it that plainly unless she had something to back it. "He wrote me letters during our engagement," she said. "After my father's situation became clear, but before he ended it publicly. He knew. He promised me in writing that it didn't matter." She paused. "And then a richer prospect came along and he needed an exit that didn't make him the villain. So he made me the villain instead. And the letters. I have them. Why haven't you used them?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because proving he lied means explaining the full truth about my father's last months. And my father was not a bad man. He was a desperate one who made choices that were wrong and that hurt people he didn't intend to hurt." She looked at Callum steadily. "I was not willing to hand his memory to a room full of people who'd already decided they didn't like us." "So you protected your father?" "I protected what was left of him, yes." Callum leaned back slightly. His jaw worked once. "Where are the letters now?" he said. "Somewhere safe." "Wexford's been looking." She glanced at him sharply. "I have people," he said simply without apology. "When your name came up in relation to his, I asked questions. He's been making inquiries through intermediaries, trying to locate you socially, trying to find what you have." Maren absorbed this. "He's courting someone," she said. "A widow. Mrs. Constance Harfield." He met her eyes. "Wealthy, kind by reputation, does not yet know what he is." The silence between them had weight. "He's going to do it again," Maren said. "Reckon so. To her what he did to me. That's his pattern." Callum's voice was flat. "Man like that doesn't change the game, just changes the table." Maren stood up. She walked to the window and stood there with her back to him, looking out at the kitchen garden, and she allowed herself to feel the full weight of it. The 6 years, the borrowed rooms, the careful silence, the slow erasure of a life she'd been meant to have, and then she put it down. Not gone, just set aside. She was going to need both hands. "I want him to stop," she said. I want him to stop," she said again, and the emphasis was quiet but precise. Not another powerful man stepping in and solving it with his name and his money and his position. That would just be one man using my injury as an excuse for his own. She turned. "I want the truth to stop him. The actual truth. Standing on its own." Callum looked at her for a long moment. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Not what do you want me to do. What do you need from me?" The difference landed. "Standing room," she said. "I need somewhere safe to stand while I decide how to do this." He proposed 2 months later. She said no before the sentence was finished. She said it fast, which told him she'd been rehearsing it. "Why?" he said. "Because the story that gets told about us is that a poor woman caught herself a duke, and I have spent 6 years living inside a story other people wrote about me." She held his gaze. "I will not spend the next 6 inside a different one." He was quiet. "What if the story," he said slowly, "is that you said no?" She waited. "I asked. You refused. I came back. You thought about it. Eventually, if you choose to, you said yes." He watched her face. "That ain't a story about a woman who needed rescuing. That's a story about a woman who made a choice." Maren looked at him for a long time. "You'd come back," she said, "as many times as it takes." She almost said yes then. She didn't. Because almost wasn't the same as certain, and she had learned the hard, slow way that the difference between almost and certain was exactly where lives went wrong. "Ask me again in the spring," she said. He asked her again in the spring on a Tuesday morning, in the small room off the library without ceremony or roses or any of the usual theater. And he asked her the same way he'd asked everything since the beginning. Directly, plainly, like a man who had decided the truth was worth more than a pretty delivery. She said yes. She said it once. She didn't qualify it or cushion it or apologize for wanting it. She said yes, and she meant it all the way down. They married in April. 4 witnesses. No announcement. Maren had asked for the quiet. She had one thing left to settle. Blaine had been pushing harder in the preceding week's messages through intermediaries. Careful and cold. Surrender the letters, or face a renewed campaign. He had done it before. He believed he could do it again. He did not know she was a duchess. He did not know anything had changed. And Maren carefully and deliberately had let him believe that. The invitation to the Greystone Autumn Ball had been anticipated. Blaine would be there. Mrs. Harfield would be there. 200 witnesses who had watched Maren Bellrose be diminished for years would be there. Her plan had been quiet. A private conversation. A clear line. Walk away from Constance Harfield, leave London society, or the letters reach the right hands. Clean. Controlled. Finished. She had not planned on a scene. She had not planned on Blaine looking at her across that ballroom and deciding with the particular confidence of a man who has never once faced a real consequence that she was still someone who could be managed. She had not planned on the glass shattering. She had not planned on 200 people watching. But here she was. Her cheek burned. The pieces of the glass lay at her feet. Callum stood beside her, not in front of her, not between her and Blaine, but beside her, and she could feel the effort that cost him. The deliberate white-knuckled effort of a man who wanted very badly to handle this, and was choosing because she had asked him to, not to. She reached into the small purse at her wrist. Her fingers closed around the envelope. She did not take it out. Not yet. She looked at Blaine Wexford, at the panic moving behind his careful face, at the man who had taken her name and her story, and 6 years of her life, and built his own safety out of her silence, and she felt something she had not expected to feel. Not triumph, not rage. Clarity. Clean, cold, final clarity. "You made one miscalculation tonight," she said. Blaine's jaw tightened. "You came here believing I was still the woman you left." Her voice didn't shake. "I'm not. I haven't been for a long time. You just weren't paying close enough attention to notice." She took one step forward. "That ends tonight." And the envelope came out of her purse, and the room, all 200 souls in it. Every last one who had ever looked through Maren Bellrose like she was furniture went so absolutely completely still that the only sound in all of Blackmere House was the faint flutter of paper in a woman's steady hand. The envelope stayed in her hand. Blaine stared at it the way a man stares at a loaded gun, not at the person holding it, but at the thing itself, the specific object that could end him. "You won't," he said. Maren looked at him. "You won't do it here," he said again, and this time there was something underneath the words that was almost a plea. "Not in front of all these people. That's not who you are. You never wanted a scene, Maren. You never wanted any of this public. That's why you've held those letters for 6 years and done nothing with them." He was not wrong about the old version of her. That was what made it dangerous. He was reciting her perfectly. The way you recite someone. You studied someone. You took apart carefully and put back together in your mind, so you'd always know exactly how she'd move. He just hadn't updated his notes. "You're right," Maren said. "I didn't want a scene." She looked down at the envelope, then back up at him. "You created one." The muscle in his jaw moved. "Give me the letters," he said. "Give them to me, and I walk out that door, and this is finished. No more pressure. No more intermediaries. You live your life, I live mine." "And Constance Harfield?" A beat too long before he answered. "That's a private matter." "It's the same matter," Maren said. "It's always the same matter with you. Find a woman. Learn what she has. Take it. Leave when something better appears." She tilted her head. "And make sure before you go that she's the one who looks like the fool." Someone in the crowd made a small sound. Blaine heard it. His eyes cut sideways briefly, then came back. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said low and tight. "I have every idea." She held the envelope steady. "That's the part you never accounted for." Callum had not moved, had not spoken. He stood at her left side with his hands loose at his sides and his face absolutely unreadable, and the effort of that, the sheer disciplined effort of a man built for action, choosing stillness because the woman beside him had asked him to radiate it off him like heat. Blaine looked at him once desperate. Callum looked back with nothing. Ravenshaw. Blaine tried one more time. "Surely you understand a man's reputation, his business dealings, these are private matters between—" "You struck my wife," Callum said. "Just that." Blaine closed his mouth. "In my house," Callum continued, "in front of 200 people you raised your hand to my wife. And now you're asking me to care about your reputation." He paused. "I want you to think about how that sounds." The silence that followed had weight and texture, and it pressed on every person in that room. Maren let it hold for exactly 3 seconds. Then she put the envelope back into her purse. Blaine blinked, confused, off balance. "I came here tonight," Maren said, "to give you a choice, not a scene. I didn't want 200 witnesses. I wanted one private conversation and a clean ending." She looked at him steadily. "You took that option away when you raised your hand." "Then why?" "Because you need to know that I can." Her voice was quiet and final. "You've spent 6 years believing I was helpless. I want you to spend the rest of your life knowing I wasn't. I simply chose not to move until I was ready." She turned away from him. Callum touched the small of her back, barely just the brush of his hand, and she walked forward, and the crowd parted for her, the same way it had parted for him when he crossed the room. And that was the moment, the precise moment, when 200 people in that ballroom began to understand that something had shifted in the architecture of this world they thought they knew. They moved through the crowd, and out through the side door, and into the cold corridor beyond, and it was only when the door closed behind them and the noise of the ballroom became muffled that Maren stopped walking. She put one hand against the wall. She breathed. "You're shaking," Callum said. "I know." I didn't tell her she didn't need to. He didn't tell her it was over, that she was safe, that everything was fine. He knew better than that. He just stood close and let her shake and said nothing, which was the right thing, which was what she needed. After a moment she said, "Did I do the right thing?" "Putting it away. Leaving it unfinished." "Ain't unfinished," he said. "It's undetonated. Different thing." He was quiet a beat. "You'll know when the time is right." She looked up at him. "What if I don't?" Then I reckon you'll figure it out on the way. The corner of his mouth moved. You usually do. She almost laughed. Almost. Her cheek was beginning to throb in earnest now that the adrenaline was thinning. Callum watched it happen, watched the bruise deepen, and the controlled composure start to cost her more than it had, and he did not reach out to touch her face because she hadn't asked him to, because she was still deciding what she needed. He waited. That was what he had learned to do. It had taken him longer than it should have. 14 months earlier, Duke Callum Ravenshaw had been a man who solved problems. That was how he thought of himself, how others thought of him. His reputation had been built on it across 20 years of managing an estate that encompassed 4 counties, 11 tenant villages, and more inherited complications than most men encountered in 3 lifetimes. He did not delegate what he could handle. He did not wait when he could act. He moved on problems the way he moved on everything directly, decisively, and with the full weight of his position behind him. It had never once occurred to him that this was a flaw. Then he met Maren Bellrose. The ledger situation at Greystone Hall had been straightforward enough. He had the documentation. He had the figures. He had the authority to compel Aldred Cushwell to address it. He laid the evidence out on Aldred's study desk on a Thursday morning, clear and organized and undeniable, and the matter was handled by Friday afternoon. What was not straightforward was the woman who had already solved it before he arrived. He came back to the small room off the library on the Saturday morning because he had more questions about the ledgers. He told himself that was the only reason. He was not a man who examined his reasons too closely when they were pointed in the direction he already wanted to go. She was at the table when he came in, writing something in a hand so precise it looked like typeset. She looked up. She didn't smile the way women smiled at him, which was to say, she didn't perform surprise or pleasure or welcome. She just looked at him and waited to find out what he wanted. I wanted to ask you about the figures from the Ashford parcels, he said. Sit down, she said, not unkindly. He sat. She explained the Ashford figures. He asked questions. She answered without hedging or over-explaining or watching his face to make sure he was impressed. She just answered, and when he pushed back on one of her conclusions, she didn't soften it. She showed him the calculation again, slower, and let him see that she was right. He was not accustomed to that. He found he liked it considerably more than he expected. They worked through the morning. At some point, Mrs. Cushwell sent a maid to inform him that luncheon was being served. He sent the maid back with a polite decline. Mrs. Cushwell sent the maid again. He sent her back again. Maren glanced at him sideways. You're going to cause trouble for me, she said. How's that? She'll think I'm detaining you. You are detaining me. I'm answering your questions. Same thing. He looked at the ledger in front of him. I'll make it clear the choice was mine. That will cause different trouble. She said it without drama. Just the flat, patient voice of a woman who understood the way the world worked and had stopped being surprised by it. Women who detain dukes are a particular category of social problem. You're not detaining me. I chose to stay. And who will people believe? She looked at him evenly. You or me? He was quiet. I thought about that for longer than he'd thought about most things recently. Then he closed the ledger, stood up and said, I'll be back Monday, and left for luncheon. She was right. She usually was. And he was beginning to understand that her being right was not a coincidence or a performance. It was simply the natural result of a very precise mind that had been applied without recognition or reward to problems that mattered. Monday came. He came back. Tuesday. Wednesday. By the end of the second week, Aldred Cushwell had stopped pretending not to notice and had started giving Callum meaningful looks across the dinner table, and Mrs. Cushwell had begun finding reasons to make sure Maren was present at every meal, and the whole household had developed a quiet collective interest in the situation that nobody mentioned aloud, because mentioning it aloud might end it. Callum did not notice any of this. I was reading Maren's response to his third annotation in the Cicero. She had written, You're right that he was frightened. But I think his fear was specific. It wasn't death he feared. It was irrelevance. He had spent his life believing that good arguments delivered well could change the course of things. The Republic proved him wrong. What do you do with a life built on a premise that turns out to be false? He sat with that question for a long time. Then he wrote under it. You find a different premise, or you stop building and start surviving. Most men pick surviving. I used to think that was cowardice. I'm less certain now. He left the book on the table. I went back to Blackmere the next day, on business that needed attending to, and he spent 4 days there, managing 3 separate crises involving fencing disputes and a mill lease and a letter from his solicitors that required careful handling, and the entire time underneath all of it, running parallel to every meeting and every decision and every problem that required his full attention, he was thinking about what she had written. What do you do with a life built on a premise that turns out to be false? He came back to Greystone on the 5th day. The evening he found out about Blaine Callum sat in the library after Maren had gone to bed and stayed there until well past midnight. He did not do anything dramatic. He did not throw anything or pace the room or demand names and satisfactions. He sat in his chair with a glass of brandy he didn't touch and thought about 6 years. 6 years of Maren Bellrose, navigating borrowed rooms and unpaid labor, and the particular daily humiliation of being useful to people who had decided she was beneath acknowledgement. 6 years of a lie walking free in society, while the truth it was built on stayed locked in an envelope in a hiding place he didn't know. 6 years of a woman making herself small enough to survive. I thought about the dinner table. About her saying, I believe that figure is closer to 43, and the whole room laughing, and her apologizing, and him saying nothing. He hadn't said anything. The fact of that sat in his chest like something swallowed wrong. He could destroy Blaine Wexford in a week. Less possibly. A word in the right ear, a look at the right social gathering, a quiet withdrawal of certain financial connections that Wexford didn't know ran through Callum's network. It would be clean and complete, and Wexford would spend the rest of his life wondering which specific misstep had ended him. And Maren would never forgive him. Not for doing it. For doing it without her. I don't want another powerful man deciding my story for me, even if that man loves me. The sentence had rearranged something in him. He was not accustomed to examining how he moved through the world. He had authority, and he used it, and the problems got solved, and he had always considered that the definition of doing things right. He protected what was his. He defended what mattered. He moved first so that others didn't have to move at all. He had spent 43 years believing that was love. He was beginning to understand it was sometimes love, and sometimes it was just control wearing love's clothing. He proposed on a Tuesday. He had not planned it for Tuesday specifically. He had planned it for when that felt right, which turned out to be a Tuesday in late November when they were arguing about a property contract that his estate managers had drafted and that Maren had found 3 problems with in under 10 minutes. This clause here, she said, pointing with her pen, gives the tenant no recourse if the harvest fails 2 years running. You'd be legally protected, but morally you'd be. I know, he said. Then why is it in there? Because my managers drafted it, and I hadn't read it closely enough yet. He looked at her. That's why I have you look at these things. She paused. You don't have me, she said carefully. No. He held her gaze. I know. Wrong word. A pause. I want to, though. She looked at him. He said it then. Not with ceremony. Not with speeches. He asked her to marry him the same way he asked her everything directly plainly, because he didn't know how to be indirect with her and had stopped trying weeks ago. She said no before he finished the sentence. He saw it on her face a half-second before it came out, the decision that had been ready and waiting, that she had made somewhere before this moment and was now simply delivering. Why? He said. Because the story that gets told. I know what you're going to say. His voice was not sharp. Just tired. The tiredness of a man who had thought about this more than she knew. And you're not wrong. People will say it. He leaned forward. Let them. Maren, you cannot organize your life around the stories that small people tell. I've had to, she said. That's the difference between us. Your whole life the stories people told about you helped you. Mine have cost me everything I had. She looked at the window. I can't be careless with that. I don't have the same margin for it that you do. It was quiet for a long time. Then, what would make it safe? It isn't about safe. What would make it feel like a choice, he said, and not a rescue? She turned back from the window. He looked at her steadily. Because I'm not interested in rescuing you, Maren. You don't need rescuing. I've watched you handle things that would have folded men twice your experience, and you did it with 4 people's worth of work and nobody's acknowledgement and a wage of exactly nothing. His voice didn't rise. I don't want to rescue you. I want to stand in the same room as you and not pretend we're something less than what we are. Her throat moved. Ask me again in the spring, she said. I'll ask you every season until you say yes. That's not. Or until you tell me you've decided no, he said. But I want it to be a decision, not a defense. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face, not softness exactly, but the particular expression of a woman who has held something very tightly for a very long time and has just felt the first loosening. Spring, she said. He nodded, got up, put his jacket on. At the door he stopped. For what it's worth, he said without turning around. I reckon you already know what you're going to say. He left before she could answer. The spring proposal was on a Tuesday again. He didn't plan that either. It was just a Tuesday. She was in the small room. The ledgers were on the table. The Cicero was on the corner of the shelf where it had lived since November, full now of their combined handwriting in the margins. 2 people's thoughts pressed up against each other on paper, in the way they had not yet allowed themselves to be in person. He came in. He sat down. He said, I'm asking again. She looked at him. Something in her face was different from November. The held tightly look was gone. Not replaced with certainty, exactly more like she had stopped fighting the certainty that was already there. Callum, she said. Maren, if I say yes, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. I will not become quiet again. I will not make myself small for your household, or your title, or your guests, or your managers. If I disagree with you, I will tell you so. If you're wrong, I will say so. If I find another 3 errors in your property contracts, I will point at every single one of them. I'm counting on it, he said, and I want to handle Blaine myself. I know. My way. On my terms. When I decide. I know that too. He held her gaze. I'll be there. Right beside you. Not in front of you. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. Just that. No qualification. No cushion. No apology for wanting it. She said yes, and she meant it from the floor up. They married in April. Quiet. Small. 4 witnesses and no announcement because Maren had asked for time, and Callum had given it to her without requiring an explanation. Blaine had been moving faster. The intermediary messages had shifted in tone across the winter, less polite, more pointed. The implication was clear: the longer Maren waited, the more it would cost her. He had done this before. He knew how to apply pressure to a woman who had nowhere to press back from. He did not know the ground beneath her had changed. He did not know that when he sent his intermediaries, they were reporting back to a man who had been cataloging every approach, every message, every social connection Blaine used as a conduit, and filing it all away with the patience of someone who did not need to move quickly because he knew exactly when the moment would come. He did not know any of that. He only knew that Maren Bellrose, poor, quiet, careful. Maren Bellrose, who had always been too careful to fight him, had stopped responding to his intermediaries entirely. He decided to handle it in person. The Greystone Autumn Ball was the natural choice. Neutral ground, publicly respectable, and crowded enough that a conversation could happen in a corner without drawing attention. He would be charming. He would be regretful. He would make her feel one more time that the wisest and kindest thing she could do for everyone involved was let him have what he needed. He had done it before. He was very good at it. What he had not accounted for was Maren arriving alone, or appearing to arrive alone, in a gown that was quiet and dark, and cost more than anything she'd worn in the preceding 6 years, with her hair up and her back straight, and the particular composure of a woman who was not there by accident. He had not accounted for her eyes when she looked across the ballroom and found him before he found her. He had not accounted for the fact that she had been looking for him specifically, that she had known exactly where he would be, that the whole evening had been arranged around a confrontation she had been preparing for since spring. He approached her near the east windows. "Maren." His smile was warm and practiced. "You look well." "Blaine?" Her voice was pleasant. "You look exactly the same." Something flickered in his expression. He covered it smoothly. "I was hoping we might have a chance to talk tonight," he said. "Privately. Somewhere we can settle this business between us like reasonable adults." "There's no business between us," she said. "There's only a decision you need to make." His smile held. "And what decision is that?" "Whether you tell Constance Harfield the truth about your finances, or I do." The smile didn't move, but something behind it did. "That's a serious accusation," he said. "It's a statement of fact." She held his gaze. "I know what you owe and to whom. I know what you've told her about your situation. And I know that if she knew what I know, she would make a very different choice." "You've been investigating me," he said, and now the warmth in his voice had thinned to something more like wire. "I've been paying attention," she said. "I find it comes naturally." He stepped closer, still smiling. But his eyes had changed. "You're overreaching," he said quietly. "You always did. That was always your problem, Maren. You thought very carefully, and you planned very thoroughly, and then you forgot that none of it matters if you don't have the position to back it up." He tilted his head. "What are you going to do exactly?" "Walk up to Constance Harfield with your American accent and your borrowed social standing, and tell her to reconsider. She'll be polite about it. Then she'll mention it to her friends. Then those friends will wonder why a woman of your particular history is involving herself in other people's romantic affairs." He lowered his voice further. "Give me the letters, Maren, and I will leave you alone." "No," she said. The smile disappeared. "This is your last chance," he said. "I was going to say the same to you." He took one more step toward her. "You don't have anyone in this room," he said. "You don't have connections here. You don't have—" "I have the letters," she said. "And I have the truth. And I have considerably more patience than you've ever given me credit for." His face changed. She saw it happen, the careful social polish cracking under the pressure of everything. He stood to lose all the debt and the danger and the years of management collapsing under the weight of one woman who simply refused to move. His hand came up before he'd finished deciding to move it. And then the sound cracked through the ballroom, and the glass fell. And now in the corridor outside, with the muffled sounds of 200 stunned guests on the other side of the door. Maren stood with her hand against the wall and her cheek throbbing and the envelope still in her purse. She was still shaking, but her voice when she finally spoke was steady. "He'll be back," she said. "He won't stop. Tonight didn't stop him, it just made him desperate." "I know," Callum said. "Desperate men make mistakes." "They do. I need him to make one more." She turned from the wall and looked at him. In public, in front of the right people. Callum studied her face. "You're not done tonight," he said. "No," she said. "I'm not." He looked at her for a long moment. The bruise on her cheek, the steadiness of her eyes, the way she was standing, not leaning on the wall anymore, not shaking anymore, just upright and present and already thinking 3 moves ahead. He had ridden into that ballroom thinking the dangerous thing was Blaine Wexford's temper. He understood now that he had miscounted. The dangerous thing in that marriage had never been him. It was the woman standing beside him who had spent 6 years being underestimated, who had spent 6 years learning exactly what that felt like, and who had decided quietly, precisely, and without any drama at all, that she was finished letting other people decide when she was allowed to move. "Then let's go back in," he said. And he offered her his arm, and this time she took it. They walked back in together. Callum's arm was steady under her hand. Maren's grip on it was steady too, not clutching, not leaning, just the clean contact of 2 people who had decided to move in the same direction at the same time. The ballroom door opened. 200 heads turned. Not gradually. All at once, the way heads turn when a room has been waiting. Maren had expected that. She had prepared for that. What she had not prepared for was the quality of the silence. Not the stunned silence from before, when the glass shattered, but something different now. Something watchful. The silence of a room that had spent the last 10 minutes recalibrating and had not yet finished. Blaine was still there. She had thought he might run. He hadn't. I was standing near the center of the room with a glass in his hand and his chin up, and the particular posture of a man who had decided that the only remaining move was to look like he had nothing to be afraid of. He had rearranged his face into something close to composure. He was wearing it the way he wore his coat, carefully with attention to how it appeared from the outside. She had seen that face before. She had once believed it. Maren let go of Callum's arm. She walked forward, not toward Blaine, not yet. She walked to the center of the room, and she stopped, and she turned, and she looked not at Blaine, not at Callum, but at the room itself. At the 200 people who had watched a man strike her and had not moved. She had something to say to that room. She had been composing it in pieces for 6 years. "I owe most of you an introduction," she said. Her voice carried. She had not raised it. It simply carried the way voices carry in rooms that have gone completely quiet. "My name is Maren Ravenshaw. I was Maren Bellrose. Some of you knew me as that, as the American relation, the quiet one, the woman who was useful at parties and invisible the rest of the time." She paused. "I've been the Duchess of Blackmere for 7 months. I didn't announce it because I had unfinished business to attend to first." The whispers started immediately. She let them run for 3 seconds. Then, "The unfinished business is standing about 15 feet to my left." Every head swiveled to Blaine. He did not move. He could not move. He was pinned by 200 pairs of eyes and the specific terrible gravity of a moment that had been coming for 6 years and had finally arrived. "6 years ago," Maren said, "Blaine Wexford told this society that I had deceived him about my family's financial situation, that I had hidden my father's bankruptcy to trap him into an engagement." Her voice did not shake. He was lying. Someone near the back made a sound. Blaine stepped forward. "Maren." "Don't," Callum said. "One word, from the doorway, quiet." Blaine stopped. Maren continued as though neither of them had spoken. "I have letters," she said, "written by Blaine during our engagement after my father's situation became clear. In those letters, he promises me in his own hand that my family's finances do not change his intentions, that he loves me regardless." She reached into her purse. "And then a richer prospect appeared, and he needed an exit, and he chose to build that exit out of my reputation." The envelope was in her hand now, open. She did not read from the letters. She did not need to. She simply held them where the room could see that they existed, that they were real, that they were here, that 6 years of a lie had been carried around in a small envelope that a woman had protected at considerable personal cost. "He's been asking for these back," she said, "for months, through intermediaries, with increasing pressure." She looked at Blaine directly. "Because he is currently courting someone, and he knows that if she had this information, she would make a different choice." The room had gone so still that the candles could be heard. Maren's eyes found the east side of the ballroom. "Mrs. Harfield," she said. Constance Harfield was 51 years old with dark eyes and a composed face and the careful stillness of a woman who had already been doing significant internal work for the past 15 minutes. She had positioned herself near the east windows at the start of the evening, and she had not moved from that position since the confrontation began. She had heard more than Blaine knew. She looked at Maren now. Maren looked back. "I'm not telling you what to decide," Maren said. "I'm giving you what I didn't have, the information. The choice is yours." Constance Harfield looked from Maren to Blaine. Blaine looked at Constance with everything he had left, all the charm and the warmth and the practiced sincerity that had served him for 20 years, and he said, "Constance, you know me. Whatever she says, whatever is in those letters, you know who I am." Constance was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's what worries me." She reached up. She removed his ring from her right hand. They had not yet announced an engagement formally, but the ring had been there for 3 weeks, and everyone in the room knew what it meant, and she placed it on the small table beside her. She did not throw it. She did not make a speech. She simply set it down with the precise, deliberate care of a woman who has made a decision and intends to be at peace with it. And she walked away. The sound that went through the ballroom was not a gasp. It was something lower and more collective than that. The sound of 200 people exhaling at the same moment. Blaine turned. He turned slowly the way a man turns when he cannot quite believe the direction from which the damage has come. He looked at the ring on the table. He looked at Maren. He looked at the letters in her hand. He looked at Callum in the doorway. And then something happened that Maren had not expected. He laughed. It was not a happy sound. It was thin and strange, and it had no real amusement in it. It was the sound a man makes when he has run out of every other response and laughter is all that's left. "You think this finishes it," he said. Maren said nothing. "You think standing up in a room with your Duke behind you and your little letters and your—" He stopped. The laugh died. What replaced it was worse. "You have no idea what I can still do to you. Wexford." Callum's voice came from behind Maren, and this time there was something in it that had not been there before. Not a threat, not anger, just a line drawn clearly that indicated the exact boundary of how far this was going to go. "You're done." "I'm done when I decide I'm done." "No." Callum walked forward until he was standing beside Maren. Not in front of her. Beside her. And he looked at Blaine with the patience of a man who has waited a long time to say something and is in no hurry now that the moment has arrived. "You're done because there is nothing left. The letters are in her hand. The room heard it. The woman you were using walked away." He paused. "And you just threatened my wife in front of 200 witnesses, which means anything that happens to your reputation from this evening forward will be attributed accurately to your own conduct." Blaine's jaw tightened. "You think she's strong," he said, and now he was only talking to Callum, which was its own kind of mistake. "You think she's capable. You think she handled this." He shook his head. "She had you, that's all. Remove you from this room and she's still nobody. She'll always be nobody. A man of your position with a woman like—" "Like what?" Maren said. He looked at her. She looked back. And there was something in her face that stopped whatever he had been about to say. Not anger, not coldness, but the particular expression of a woman who has heard this specific category of diminishment so many times that she is genuinely calmly curious to hear what version of it he's about to produce. "Like what?" she said again, as he understood in that moment that whatever he said would be the last thing he said in this room, and that it would follow him, and that every person present would carry it with them, and that Maren Bellrose, Maren Ravenshaw, had just handed him a trap disguised as an invitation, and he had nearly walked into it. He was smarter than that. He had always been smarter than that. He closed his mouth. He straightened his coat. He looked at the ring on the table and did not pick it up, and then he walked toward the door. He walked with his head level and his pace measured and everything about his posture, communicating a dignity he did not feel, and the crowd parted for him in the way crowds part for people. They are eager to see leave, and he crossed the ballroom and went through the door, and he was gone. The room held its breath for 3 full seconds after the door closed. Then it erupted, not into cheering, into conversation. Fast overlapping, the kind of urgent collective processing that happens when a room full of people has just witnessed something they will be describing to others for the rest of their lives, and have not yet had time to fully understand what they saw. Maren stood in the middle of it. Her hands were not shaking anymore. She looked down at the letters at the worn edges of the envelope, at her father's name, written in Blaine's handwriting on one of the folded pages, at the specific physical reality of something she had carried and protected and refused to surrender for 6 years, and she felt something she had not anticipated. Not triumph. She had expected triumph. Something quieter than that. Something that felt cautiously, and with some wonder, like it might be relief. Callum touched her arm. Light. A question, not an assertion. She looked up at him. "All right," he said. "Ask me tomorrow," she said. He almost smiled. "Fair enough." Then someone was at her elbow. A woman she vaguely recognized. A baronet's wife, someone who had looked through her at 3 separate social occasions in the preceding year, and the woman was touching her arm and saying something warm and slightly breathless about how brave that had been. How remarkable. And Maren understood in an instant that the room had already begun to rewrite what they had witnessed, had already begun to position themselves as people who had always recognized something special in the quiet American woman, who had always suspected there was more there than met the eye. She was gracious about it. She smiled and thanked the woman and said the appropriate things, and she did all of this while a part of her observed it with the cool clarity of someone who understood exactly what was happening and was not surprised by it. This was how rooms worked. She knew that. She had always known that. Power rearranged perception. The same people who had not moved when Blaine's hand came down were now crowding around her with their warmth and their admiration and their revised histories of how they'd always seen her. It wasn't worth being angry about. She filed it away somewhere useful and kept smiling. Across the room, Constance Harfield was sitting alone. Maren saw her between the press of people, saw her sitting very upright on a small chair near the east wall, with her hands folded in her lap and her face composed in the particular way that means a great deal of composure is being applied to a great deal of feeling. She looked like a woman who had just made a significant decision and was waiting to find out how it felt to have made it. Maren excused herself from the baronet's wife. She crossed the room. She sat down in the empty chair beside Constance Harfield, and she did not say anything for a moment, because sometimes the kindest opening is silence. Constance spoke first. "How long did you know?" she said. "About what he was doing, about me." "A few months," Maren said. "Since before the engagement was public." "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" It was a fair question. Maren had asked herself the same one. "Because I wasn't sure you'd believe me," she said. "I have a history with him. I knew how he'd frame it if I came to you privately, jealous woman. Old grievance, trying to interfere in a happy arrangement." She paused. "I needed the truth to be undeniable, not just my word against his." Constance was quiet for a moment. "He was very convincing," she said. "He always is. I thought—" She stopped, started again. "I thought there was something, a few times, something that didn't quite fit." She looked at the table where the ring still sat. "I told myself I was being suspicious, that I'd been alone long enough that I was looking for problems." "He counts on that," Maren said. "He finds women who have learned to doubt their own instincts, and then he very carefully confirms every doubt they have about themselves, while eliminating every doubt they have about him." Constance turned to look at her. "He did that to you," she said. "Yes." "How long did it take you to trust yourself again?" Maren thought about the small room off the library, about the Cicero, about the first morning she'd corrected a man's arithmetic at a dinner table and felt the automatic shame of it, the reaching for an apology before anyone had asked for one. "Longer than it should have," she said. "And I had help." Constance looked toward Callum, who was standing on the other side of the room, speaking with someone, but watching Maren with the particular peripheral attention of a man who was ready to move in any direction she needed at a moment's notice. "He loves you," Constance said. "Yes. Not because of the title, not because you're useful. No." Maren followed her gaze. "He loved me when I was the quiet woman at the end of the table, who corrected his numbers and then apologized for it." She paused. "He came back the next day and asked me to explain my reasoning. No one had ever done that before." Constance was quiet for a long moment. "I would like," she said carefully, "to not speak about Blaine Wexford again after tonight. I would like to close that door and not reopen it." "That seems wise," Maren said. "But I would like—" Constance stopped. The composure wavered just slightly for just a moment. "I would like to not feel foolish for the rest of my life, for having believed him." "You're not foolish," Maren said. You nearly believed someone who was very skilled at being believed." Maren looked at her directly. "That is not a flaw of intelligence or character. That is the consequence of someone working very hard to deceive you." She paused. "The moment you had the information, you made the right call. In front of 200 people and without flinching." She tilted her head slightly. "I'd say that's the opposite of foolish." Constance looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You're rather remarkable, you know." I'm practical, Maren said. People confuse the two. Something shifted in Constance's expression. The composure relaxed into something that was almost a smile. I'd like to call on you, she said. If that's permitted, if you're willing. I'm willing, Maren said. She meant it. The letters went back into her purse. Maren had not returned them to anyone, had not handed them to a magistrate, had not passed them through solicitors, had not arranged for them to be circulated. She had held them in a room full of witnesses, let the room see that they existed, let them serve their purpose, and then she had put them away. Callum noticed. He said nothing until they were in the carriage, moving away from Blackmere House, with the sounds of the ball retreating behind them, and then he said, You kept them. Yes. Why? Because they're mine, she said. He spent 6 years trying to get them back. I spent 6 years protecting them. They don't belong to him, and they don't belong to any proceeding or any magistrate. They belong to me. She looked at her hands. And someday, when I've decided what I want to do with them, I'll decide. But tonight, they go back to where they came from. Callum looked at her in the dark of the carriage. You're not done with him, he said. Not entirely, not legally. She lifted her eyes to him. The debt he's carrying the people he owes money to, that's going to collapse him eventually, whether I do anything or not. The truth about his finances is already moving. Mrs. Harfield will talk to her solicitors. Those solicitors will talk to others. She paused. I don't need to light the fire. I just needed to remove the thing he was using to keep me quiet. The letters. The letters. Callum was quiet for a moment. You planned all of this, he said. Most of it. The part you didn't plan. Her hand went briefly to her cheek. That part, she said. He reached across and took her hand. Not dramatically. Just took it and held it and didn't say anything about what had happened, because there was nothing to say about it that would make it smaller than it was. She let him hold it. That was new. Letting him hold something that hurt without immediately picking it back up and carrying it herself. It was new, and it was harder than it looked, and she was working at it. Callum, she said. You didn't hit him. No. I know how much that cost you. He was quiet for a moment. Then, reckon it was worth it. Was it? You stood up in that room and told your own story, he said. In your own words, with 200 people listening. His thumb moved once across her knuckles. I wasn't going to take that from you by turning it into something about me. She looked at him in the dark. She thought about the first morning she had found the book on her table, about the annotation in the margin, about a man asking her what she thought about a dead Roman's fear. She thought about the Tuesday in November and the Tuesday in April, and a yes that she had meant from the floor up. She thought about 6 years of a lie walking free, and the weight of the envelope in her purse, and the way Constance Harfield had placed a ring on a table with steady hands. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. The foundation, she said. The idea I told you about. Women like me, companions, governesses, daughters of ruined families who have education and no independence. A proper educational foundation, not charity, something real. I remember, he said. I want to start it. I know. I want to run it. Not oversee it from a distance, not lend my name to it, actually run it. Make decisions about it. Be responsible for it. Maren, I know it's unconventional, she said. I know it will raise questions. I know there will be people who say a duchess doesn't. Maren. His voice was patient. I was going to say yes. She stopped. I was going to say yes before you finished the sentence, he said. I have been waiting for you to ask. She looked at him. You knew I was going to ask. I've known since March. He looked faintly amused. You reorganized my entire charitable giving structure in February, quietly, while I was in Edinburgh. I came back and the accounts looked different, and when I asked my managers, they looked at each other and then told me Miss Bellrose had found several inefficiencies. He paused. I thought, this is a woman who already knows what she wants to build. She's just waiting until she has the ground to build it on. Maren was quiet for a moment. You could have said something, she said. Could have, he agreed. But it wasn't my question to ask. He looked at her steadily. It was yours. Outside the carriage window, the lights of the city moved past. Maren looked at them. She thought about tomorrow. About the morning after the ball, when the gossip would begin to move through society, like water through a cracked wall, fast and inevitable, and carrying everything with it. About Blaine somewhere in the city, recalculating. About Constance Harfield, sitting in her own home, deciding what to do next. About a small room off a library that had once been the whole of what she had. About how much ground there was now and what she intended to build on it. He'll try something else, she said, before it's fully finished. Probably, Callum agreed. He won't be able to help himself. Men like that they can't accept that it's over when someone else decides it's over. They have to be the ones who end things. What do you want to do about it? She thought about that for a moment. Nothing, she said. Not yet. I want to let him move first, and when he does, she looked at her purse at the shape of the envelope inside it. I want to be exactly where I plan to be. Callum studied her face in the dark. You have a plan, he said. I always have a plan. You want to tell me what it is? She looked at him. No, she said. But I want you there when it happens. Right beside you, he said. Not in front of me. Right beside you, he said again, like I said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she turned back to the window and watched the city go past and felt the weight of the envelope in her purse and the warmth of his hand around hers and the particular unfamiliar sensation of moving toward something instead of away from it. She had spent 6 years learning how to survive. She was only just beginning to figure out what came after surviving. And Blaine Wexford, sitting somewhere in this same city, making his recalculations, did not yet know that the woman he had spent 6 years trying to silence had just stood in a room of 200 people and said her own name out loud. He did not know what that had cost her. He did not know what it had freed. And he had no idea what she was going to do next. That Maren thought was exactly how she wanted it. Maren woke the next morning before the household stirred. She lay still in the gray early light and waited for the satisfaction to arrive. It didn't. What arrived instead was exhaustion, the deep structural kind that doesn't come from one bad night, but from years of small accumulated weight finally releasing all at once. Like a roof beam that has been bending under snow for so long that when the snow finally melts, the beam doesn't spring back. It just settles lower and stays there. Her cheek throbbed. She touched it carefully with 2 fingers. The bruise had deepened overnight into something purple and definite that no amount of careful arrangement would conceal. She stared at the ceiling. She had expected to feel finished. She had planned for finished, had imagined it in the way you imagine the moment after a long-held breath is finally released, as something clean and sudden and complete. Instead, she felt like a woman who had carried a stone for 6 years and had just set it down and discovered that her hands had curved permanently around the shape of it. The stone was gone. The shape remained. She got up before Callum woke. She went to the small sitting room off their bedroom. Their bedroom, still a phrase that arrived with a faint quality of surprise, and she sat in the chair by the window, and she allowed herself for the first time since the glass shattered on the ballroom floor to feel the full weight of the previous evening. Not the triumph of it, the cost of it, the sound of his hand. The way 200 people had stood completely still. The particular loneliness of being struck in a room full of witnesses and understanding in real time that none of them were going to move. She had known they wouldn't. She had prepared for that. Knowing didn't make it smaller. She pressed her fingers to her eyes and breathed. She was still sitting there when the door opened. Callum came in without knocking. He had learned early that she didn't need announcement, that knocking felt like formality, and formality felt like distance, and he stopped when he saw her face. Not the bruise, her expression. He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her and said nothing. She looked at him. "I thought I'd feel better," she said. "I know. I did everything right. I planned it. I executed it. It worked exactly—" She stopped. "It worked." "It did. So why does it feel like this?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands loosely linked. "Because you spent 6 years being angry," he said. "And last night you put the anger down. And now you're finding out what was underneath it. She looked at him. What was underneath it? I reckon that's what today's for, he said. Finding out. She looked at the window. Outside London was beginning its morning. She could hear it, the distant sounds of delivery carts and early voices, and the particular rhythm of a city that does not stop for anyone's reckoning. He'll try something, she said, before the week is out. Probably. He won't be able to help himself. He never could. She turned back to Callum. He sent a letter last night, after he left. I know it without seeing it. Callum reached into his jacket. He held out an envelope. She stared at it. It arrived an hour ago, he said. I was going to let you sleep. She took it. Her name was on the front in Blaine's handwriting. Precise controlled the hand of a man who had learned early that presentation was everything. She opened it. She read it once, then again. Then she set it on the arm of the chair and looked at Callum. He's threatening a legal action, she said. Defamation. He claims what I said last night constituted a public attack on his character with deliberate intent to cause financial and social harm. Callum's jaw tightened. He can't. He knows he can't win it, Maren said. That's not the point. The point is the process. A legal proceeding means my name in the papers. It means every detail of my father's finances examined publicly. It means months of... She stopped, breathed. He's not trying to win. He's trying to make the cost of fighting him higher than the cost of surrender. Same move, Callum said. Different table. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. What do you want to do? She looked at the letter on the chair arm. She thought about her father, about a man who had been desperate and not bad, who had made choices that were wrong without being cruel, who had died owing debts he could not pay, and carrying shame he had not entirely earned, and whose memory she had protected for 6 years at the cost of her own name. She thought about the letters in her purse, and she thought about a name she had not yet mentioned to Callum. There is a solicitor, she said slowly. His name is Aldworth. He handled my father's estate when everything collapsed. He knows the full picture, not just the bankruptcy, but how it happened. The sequence. The specific decisions. She lifted her eyes. And he knows something else. Something I've never used. Callum waited. My father's bankruptcy was not entirely his own doing, she said. There was a creditor. A man who extended credit he knew my father could not repay on terms. He knew my father did not understand, and then called the debt early in a way that was technically legal and practically designed to destroy. She paused. That creditor's name appears in Blaine's correspondence, not as a creditor, as a business associate. The room went very still. Blaine knew the debt would be called, Maren said. He knew before my father did. He knew, and he said nothing, and he let my father believe the engagement was safe, and the family was stable, and there was still time. Her voice did not shake. It had gone somewhere past shaking into a register of cold, absolute clarity. He didn't just leave when the money disappeared, Callum. He was in the room when the money was taken. Callum stared at her. You've had this, he said, all this time. I didn't understand what I was looking at when I first read the letters, she said. I was 25. I knew his handwriting mentioned names and figures, and I knew it felt wrong, but I didn't have the context. She folded her hands in her lap. I had 14 months of estate accounting experience by the time I understood it fully. By the time you met me? Yes. He stood up. He turned and walked 3 steps and stopped and turned back. Maren. His voice had gone careful in the way it went careful when he was managing something large. What you're describing is, this isn't defamation and social damage. This is fraud. Potentially conspiracy to commit fraud. This is, I know what it is. Then you know that if this is real and documented and provable, Aldworth can confirm it, she said. He's been waiting for 7 years for someone to ask the right questions. He told me so the one time I visited him after my father died. She looked at Callum steadily. He told me he couldn't move without a client willing to pursue it. And I was 25 years old and alone, and I had nothing to fight with. You have something to fight with now, Callum said. Yes. He came back and sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Callum said quietly, Why are you telling me this today? Why not last night? Why not months ago? Why? Because last night was mine, she said. What happened in that ballroom, the letters, the room, Constance, all of it, I needed that to be mine. I needed to do that without it being part of something larger. She met his eyes. And because I needed to know first that you would stand beside me and not in front of me. Even when it cost you. He understood. And now you know, he said. And now I know, she said. He leaned back. Send for Aldworth, he said. Aldworth arrived 2 days later. He was 63 and slight, with the precise movements of a man who had spent 4 decades handling other people's catastrophes and had developed a particular economy of gesture as a result. He came with a leather satchel that was old enough to have history in its creases. He sat across from Maren at the table in the Blackmere House study, and he looked at her with the steady eyes of a man who had been waiting for this meeting for a long time and was not going to waste it. You have the letters, he said. Yes. All of them. Every one he sent after my father's situation became clear. Aldworth set his satchel on the table and opened it. Then I have the rest, he said. What he produced was a series of documents, financial records, correspondence between creditors, notes from meetings that should never have been written down, but had been because men who believe they are untouchable frequently make that mistake. The records of a credit arrangement, so deliberately predatory that reading them made Maren feel the particular cold anger of someone who has suspected the worst and is now confronted with proof that the worst was accurate. Blaine's name appeared 17 times across the documentation. Not as a victim, not as a bystander, as a participant. He had introduced his future father-in-law to the creditor. He had vouched for the terms as reasonable. He had been present at 2 of the meetings. And when the debt was called and the Bellrose family collapsed, he had received a payment documented, traceable, specific that bore every mark of a finder's fee. He had sold them. He had sold her father to a predatory creditor, collected a payment for the introduction, and then when the dust settled and the money was gone, positioned himself as the injured party and made Maren the villain. She sat with the documents spread in front of her, and she did not speak for a very long time. Callum sat beside her. He did not speak either. It was Aldworth who finally said quietly, I know this is difficult. It isn't difficult, Maren said. He looked at her. It's clarifying, she said. I spent 6 years wondering if there was something I had missed, some way I had misread him, some version of events where he was simply a weak man who made a cowardly choice. She looked at the documents. This isn't that. No, Aldworth said. It isn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. Yes. From the beginning. From before the beginning, I'm afraid. Aldworth folded his hands on the table. The introduction to the creditor predates your engagement by 8 months. I believe the engagement itself was at least in part designed to facilitate access to your father's trust. The sentence landed in the room with the weight of a stone dropped from a great height. Maren sat with it. She let it settle. She let herself feel the full shape of it. The 8 months, the introduction, the deliberate cultivation of her father's confidence, the careful construction of a future that was never intended to be a future at all. She had thought she understood what Blaine was. She had not understood entirely. What can we prove, she said. In a proceeding, what is provable and what is circumstantial? Aldworth opened a second set of documents. The payment is provable, he said. The correspondence establishing his involvement in the introduction is provable. His presence at the meetings is provable. He paused. Whether a court would characterize his participation as fraud rather than simply poor judgment on his part, that is a more complex question. He will have legal representation that is skilled at managing complex questions. But it would be examined publicly, Maren said. Yes, a proceeding of this nature would be fully public, and his defamation action against me would become significantly complicated to pursue, Aldworth said carefully. If he is simultaneously defending against a fraud allegation arising from the same set of events. Maren looked at Callum. Callum looked back. He filed the defamation threat to scare you off, Callum said. He didn't know you had this. He still doesn't know I have this, Maren said. A pause. "When do you want to tell him?" Callum asked. She looked at the documents on the table. At 17 instances of a man's name in records, he had never expected anyone to find and connect. "Not yet," she said. "I want to let him file the defamation action first." Aldworth blinked. Callum was very still. "Let him file it," she said. "Let him commit to the proceeding. Let him stand in front of a court with his name on a document claiming that I damaged his reputation with false statements." She looked at both of them in turn. "And then let's find out what happens to a defamation case when the defendant produces evidence of the plaintiff's involvement in financial fraud." The room was quiet. Then Callum said low and careful, "That's a significant risk. If it goes wrong." "It won't go wrong," she said. "You can't know that. I know Blaine," she said. "I know how he thinks. I know what he values. I know that the moment he understands what we have, he will withdraw the action, because the last thing he wants is for any of this to be examined in a formal proceeding where he cannot control the narrative." She leaned forward. "He has spent his entire life managing narratives. The moment he loses control of this one, the moment he understands that the proceeding he started is the thing that will expose him, he will find a way to make it disappear." Aldworth looked at her for a long moment. "You're proposing to use his own legal action as leverage," he said. "I'm proposing to let him build his own trap," she said, "and then show him what's inside it." Another silence. Then Aldworth said, "I'll need the letters." "You'll have them," Maren said. "All of them. All of them." She reached into the drawer beside her. She had moved them there that morning deliberately, because she had known this conversation was coming, and she placed the envelope on the table between them. "Take care of my father's name," she said. Aldworth looked at the envelope. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly what I intend to do." 3 weeks later, Blaine filed the defamation action. Maren received the formal notification on a Thursday morning and read it over breakfast and set it beside her teacup and went back to the correspondence she had been working through for the foundation. Callum watched her from across the table. "Well," he said. "He filed it," she said. And Aldworth will respond on Monday." She turned a page in the correspondence. "We wait." He studied her face. "You're calm," he said. "I'm working," she said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She looked up at him. "Callum, I have 12 letters of inquiry from women who want to know about the foundation. I have a property in the north that Aldworth says may be suitable for our purposes. I have 3 potential instructors who have agreed to meet with me next week." She set down the correspondence. "Blaine Wexford is a problem that is being handled. The foundation is a thing I am building. I would like to put my attention on the thing I am building." He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his own correspondence and said nothing more about it. That was one of the things she loved about him. Though she hadn't yet told him that in those words he had learned the difference between concern and interference, and he applied that knowledge with the same directness he applied everything. It had taken him 4 months to learn it. She had watched it happen, which had been its own quiet revelation. The inquiry letters were the part she had not expected. She had expected the foundation to be difficult, the logistics, the funding, the social resistance, the careful navigation of a charitable structure that was really an educational institution, in a world that had very specific ideas about what charitable institutions for women should look like and what they should produce. She had not expected the letters, 12 in the first week, 23 in the second. A woman in Shropshire who had been a governess for 11 years and had watched her employer's children grow up and leave, and had suddenly understood that she had no equivalent future waiting for her. A young woman in Bath whose father had died leaving debts she was not permitted to understand, because they were financial matters, and financial matters were not for her. A companion in Edinburgh aged 51, who wrote in handwriting. So careful, it looked like she had drafted the letter 3 times before sending, saying only that she had heard there might be something being built that was meant for women like her, and she would like to know more. Maren read every letter herself. She answered every one. Not with form responses, with actual letters, specific to what each woman had said, asking the questions that needed asking, and answering the ones that could be answered, and being honest about the ones that couldn't yet. Callum found her at the writing table at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, surrounded by correspondence and a cold cup of tea. "Come to bed," he said. "In an hour." "You said that an hour ago." "I mean it this time." He leaned in the doorway. "Maren." "There's a woman in Edinburgh," she said without looking up. "She's 51. She's been a companion for 20 years, and she has no savings and no family. And she wrote me a letter so careful I could feel her being careful through the paper." She set her pen down. "She deserves a real answer tonight." He was quiet. Then he came in and pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "What does she need?" he said. "Honestly, she needs to know she's not invisible." Maren looked at the letter. "She needs someone to say we see you, and we're building something that sees you." She paused. "The money and the education and the practical opportunities, those are real and important. But the first thing is just—" She touched the letter lightly. "The first thing is just being seen." Callum looked at her profile in the lamplight. She did not look like a woman who had stood in a ballroom 3 weeks ago and dismantled a 6-year lie in front of 200 witnesses. She looked like a woman who was writing a letter at 11 o'clock at night because a woman in Edinburgh deserved one. He thought about the dinner table at Greystone Hall, about her saying 43 families, not 31, about the table laughing and her apologizing and him saying nothing. He had been making up for that ever since. I wasn't sure he'd finished. "I'll make more tea," he said. She looked at him. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "I want to." He stood up. "Finish the Edinburgh letter. I'll be back." Aldworth's response was delivered to Blaine's solicitors on a Monday morning. It was a single document precisely drafted that did 3 things in sequence. First, it denied every claim in the defamation action and indicated that the defendant was prepared to defend each denial with documentary evidence. Second, it noted in the careful language that legal documents use when they wish to be unmistakably clear, without being theatrical, that the documentary evidence available to the defendant included materials pertaining not only to the events described in the defamation action, but to a broader pattern of conduct involving financial arrangements, predating the engagement of the parties. Third, it invited the plaintiff's solicitors to a meeting to discuss whether a formal proceeding was on reflection in their client's best interests. Blaine's solicitors sent a response within 48 hours requesting clarification of the second point. Aldworth's clarification was 2 pages long and included specific dates, specific document references, and the name of the creditor who had called the Bellrose debt. Blaine withdrew the defamation action on a Friday. No statement. No explanation. The action simply disappeared the way things disappear when the man behind them has understood that continuing will cost more than stopping. Maren was at the foundation property in the north when the news came. She was standing in what would become the main teaching room, talking with 2 of the instructors she had hired, making notes about which walls would need reinforcement and which windows faced the right direction for morning light. Callum's message arrived by Ryder. She read it, folded it, put it in her pocket. "Good news?" one of the instructors asked. "The expected kind," Maren said. "Which is the best kind?" She looked back at the room. "Now, the library. I want it on the east side. Let me show you why." She told Callum about it that evening, sitting by the fire with the day's dust still on her boots, because she had come straight from the property and not stopped to change, and she told him, the way you tell someone news, you have been carrying all day and are glad to finally set down. "It's over," she said. "It's over," he confirmed. "Really over. Not just paused. Aldworth's read his position. He's carrying debt he cannot service and 2 other creditors who are now asking questions because the name of the original one came out in the document exchange." Callum leaned back. "He's not coming back, Maren. He has nothing left to come back with." She looked at the fire. "I thought I'd feel triumphant," she said. "I felt that last night in the ballroom, I thought." "You felt it tonight," he said. "In that room." Talking about the library on the east side. She looked at him. "That's what this feels like," he said. "Not the end of him. The beginning of this." He tilted his head toward the general direction of north. That's the victory, not his collapse. That room. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the fire again. There's a woman, she said. I've been calling her Phoebe in my head. That's not her name, but she reminds me of someone I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She paused. The companion who was in the Cushwell household after I left. Young. Quiet. She stood against the wall at every dinner with her hands folded and her eyes down, and she apologized before she spoke. Maren was quiet. I know exactly what that costs. Exactly how much of yourself you spend on it every day. Write to her, Callum said. I did, she said. 3 weeks ago. And she hasn't answered yet. Maren looked at the fire. Which means she's deciding whether to trust that the offer is real, whether to trust that someone is actually asking. She turned her hands over in her lap. I remember that feeling, the waiting to find out if it's real. She'll answer, he said. I know. She looked at him. But I want to go back. I want to go to Greystone, and I want to go to that household, and I want to look her in the eye and say it plainly. Not a letter, not an offer on paper. She held his gaze. I want to cross the room. He studied her face for a moment. Then we go to Greystone, he said. Simple. Immediate. No calculation about appearances or logistics or what such a visit would imply. Just then we go. She breathed. There it was again, that loosening, that unfamiliar sensation of setting something down and not immediately picking it back up. It kept surprising her. She kept expecting it to stop arriving. It hadn't stopped yet. Callum, she said. I'm glad I said yes on the Tuesday. He was quiet for a moment. Which Tuesday? He said, and she could hear that he was almost smiling. The spring one. Not the November one. In November I said ask me again in the spring. Sounded like almost yes to me. It was almost yes, she said. That is not the same as yes. I know the difference, he said. I reckon I've always known. She looked at him. I know you have, she said. Outside the window, the city moved through its evening. Its ordinary, ongoing, indifferent evening that had not paused for her reckoning and would not pause for her relief. The world did not stop for the moment a woman finally put down what she had been carrying. It just kept going. And Maren, for the first time in 6 years, was glad of that. Because she had things to do. A room in the north that needed a library on the east side. A young woman standing against a wall somewhere who needed someone to cross the room. Letters to write and instructors to hire, and a foundation to build that was not charity, but something real, something lasting, something that would outlive the ballroom and the letters and the particular long exhaustion of a lie finally coming to its end. The stone was down. Her hands had stopped curving around the shape of it, and Maren Ravenshaw looked at the fire and felt for the first time not what she had survived, but what she was going to build. They went to Greystone Hall on a morning in late October. Maren had not been back since the wedding. She had left that household as a companion, unpaid, unacknowledged, useful, and she was returning to it as the Duchess of Blackmere, and she was aware of the symmetry of that, and she found she did not particularly care about it. She had not come for the symmetry. She had come for the girl against the wall. Mrs. Cushwell received them in the front drawing room with a warmth so sudden and so complete that it would have been comical if it hadn't been so entirely predictable. This was the same woman who had called Maren clever in the tone that made clever a criticism. This was the same woman who had found reasons across 3 years to make sure Maren understood exactly how much space she was permitted to occupy. Now she was pouring tea with her own hands and asking after the Duke's health and saying twice how wonderful it was, how they had all always known Maren was destined for something. Maren accepted the tea. She did not correct the record. There was no profit in it, and there was a girl against a wall somewhere in this house, and Maren's attention was not for Mrs. Cushwell. I'd like to see the household, Maren said when the tea had been poured and the pleasantries had run their course. I spent 3 years managing its correspondence. I have a certain fondness for it. Of course, Mrs. Cushwell said, delighted. Of course, I'll have someone show you. I know my way, Maren said, standing. Callum, I'll only be a few minutes. He met her eyes. Take as long as you need, he said. She went alone. She walked the corridors. She had walked 1,000 times past the library, past the small room off it that had been her whole world for 3 years, past the dining room where she had once said 43 families, not 31, and a table full of people had laughed. She found the girl in the morning room. She was arranging correspondence into piles exactly as Maren had once arranged it, with the same careful economy of movement, the same instinct toward taking up as little space as possible. She was perhaps 23. She had light brown hair and a plain gray dress, and the particular stillness of someone who had learned that stillness was safer than presence. She looked up when Maren came in, and then she stood very fast, and her hands came together in front of her, and her chin dropped, and she said, I'm sorry, I didn't know anyone would be. I'll just... Don't apologize, Maren said. The girl stopped. You didn't do anything wrong, Maren said. You were working. I interrupted you. She paused. I should be the one apologizing. The girl looked at her with confusion. Maren recognized the confusion. She remembered it precisely. The disorientation of being treated for a moment as though you were a person rather than a function. You're the Duchess, the girl said. I'm Maren. The girl blinked. I used to have your position, Maren said. In this exact house. I answered that correspondence. I sat at that table. I stood against a great many walls. She kept her voice easy. What's your name? Phoebe, the girl said. Phoebe Larkin. Maren went very still for just a moment, because she had been calling the girl Phoebe in her head for weeks. The imagined stand-in for every young woman she had watched apologize before speaking, and the coincidence of the name landing on a real person, a real girl in a real gray dress, struck her with a force she had not expected. She did not tell the girl that. She simply said, Phoebe, how long have you been here? 14 months. And before that, my father died, Phoebe said. There were debts. My uncle arranged this position for me. She said it flatly, the way you say things you have said many times. I'm very grateful for it. Are you? Maren said. It wasn't quite a question. Phoebe looked at her. Something moved behind the careful stillness, some flicker of a feeling that had been held down so long it had almost forgotten how to surface. It's a good position, Phoebe said carefully. That's not what I asked. The girl was quiet. Maren waited. She had learned the value of waiting. She had learned it from a man who had once sat across a table from her and waited while she decided whether to trust him, and she understood now from the other side what a gift that patience was. I don't know how to answer that, Phoebe finally said. I'm not sure anyone's ever asked me that. I know, Maren said. That's why I asked. She crossed the room. She sat down at the correspondence table in the chair the girl had been using, or one just like it, and she gestured for Phoebe to sit as well, and after a moment of hesitation the girl did. I'm going to tell you something, Maren said, and I want you to listen without deciding yet whether you believe it, because I know how difficult it is to believe. Phoebe waited. My husband and I are building something, Maren said. A foundation, in the north. For women like us, companions, governesses, daughters of ruined families. Women who have education and no independence. Women who have learned to make themselves small in order to stay. She held the girl's eyes. It isn't charity. It isn't meant to make anyone grateful. It's education, real training, bookkeeping, teaching, estate management, translation. Skills that make a woman independent. Skills that mean she never again has to depend on the kindness of an uncle or the goodwill of a distant relation to have a place in the world. Phoebe's hands folded on the table had gone very still. I wrote to a woman about it 3 weeks ago, Maren said. A companion in Edinburgh. She hasn't answered yet. Do you know why? Phoebe shook her head. Because she's afraid to believe it's real, Maren said. Because if she lets herself hope it's real, and then it isn't, that will cost her more than never hoping at all. So she's waiting, deciding whether she can afford to trust it. Maren leaned forward slightly. I remember that feeling exactly. I waited a long time before I trusted the thing that changed my life, Longer than I should have. Phoebe looked at her. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because I'm inviting you, Maren said. To be one of the first. Not the way an employer offers a position the way one person tells another that a door exists, and it's open, and no one is going to close it behind you. She paused. You don't have to answer now. You don't have to answer this week. But I wanted to say it to your face, not in a letter. I wanted you to see that a real person was asking. Phoebe's eyes had filled. She looked away quickly, the old instinct, the reflex toward hiding anything that might be inconvenient to someone else. And Maren watched her fight. It watched her wrestle with the deep-trained impulse to apologize for her own feelings. You don't have to hide that, Maren said gently. Not from me. Phoebe pressed the back of her hand to her eyes. I'm sorry, she said. I don't usually. I know, Maren said. I didn't either. For a long time. The girl looked at her. How did you stop? She said. Making yourself small. How did you stop? Maren was quiet for a moment. She thought about the answer honestly, because the girl deserved an honest answer, and because it was a question she had never quite put into words, even for herself. I didn't stop all at once, she said. It wasn't a single moment. It happened in pieces. She looked at her own hands. The first piece was someone treating my mind as though it mattered. Someone asking me what I thought, and then actually listening to the answer. That was the beginning. Not being rescued, being seen. She met the girl's eyes. And then slowly, I started to see myself the way that person saw me. And once you've seen it, you can't quite unsee it. Even on the bad days. Even when you slip back into the corner. You know the corner isn't the whole truth about you anymore. Phoebe was crying quietly now, and not hiding it. And that the not hiding was its own small victory that Maren recognized and did not remark on. Come north, Maren said. When you're ready. This week, this month, next spring. There's no deadline. The door doesn't close. She stood. But it exists, and it's open, and I crossed a great many miles to tell you so to your face. Phoebe stood too. I'll come, she said. It came out faster than she'd clearly intended the words escaping, before the careful, cautious, self-protective part of her could stop them. Then her hand came up toward her mouth, as though to take it back. I mean, if that's I don't want to presume. Phoebe, Maren said. The girl stopped. That's the last time you presumed anything by wanting something, Maren said. You said yes. You meant it. Don't apologize for it. She held out her hand. I said yes to my husband the same way. Once. Meaning it. No cushion, no apology. She almost smiled. It's the best thing I ever did. Phoebe took her hand. And for the first time since Maren had entered the room, the girl was standing fully upright, taking up exactly as much space as she was entitled to, which was to say, all of it. Jackie. They did not stay long at Greystone after that. There was nothing left there for Maren, and Mrs. Cushwell's revised warmth had a way of curdling in the mouth after prolonged exposure, and there was a girl who needed to make arrangements to travel north, and a foundation that needed building, and a great deal of ordinary work waiting. But Maren did one thing before she left. She found Mrs. Cushwell alone in the front drawing room, and she said, Phoebe Larkin will be leaving your household. She's coming to us, to the foundation. Mrs. Cushwell's face performed several things in quick succession. Well, she said. That's, I suppose, if she's determined. She is, Maren said. And I wanted to tell you personally, so there's no confusion about it. She's leaving with my knowledge and my blessing and my protection. And she leaves with a good character, which you will provide in writing before we go. She held the older woman's eyes. Because she has been useful to you for 14 months, and she has never once been thanked for it. And that ends today. Mrs. Cushwell opened her mouth. Then she looked at Maren. Really looked perhaps for the first time, and something in what she saw made her close it again. I'll have the character written by this afternoon, she said. Thank you, Maren said. And she meant it in the way you mean a thing that costs the other person something they should have given freely, long ago. The foundation opened in the spring. It did not open with a ceremony. Maren had considered one and decided against it, decided that a ceremony would make it about her, about the Duchess of Blackmere, and her generosity. When the entire point was that it was not about that at all. So it opened quietly. The first women arrived across the month of April. The companion from Edinburgh came. She had finally answered Maren's letter 3 months after receiving it with a single line that said, "If the offer is still real, I would like very much to accept it," and Maren had written back the same day that it was real, and it would always be real. She arrived on a Tuesday, with one small trunk, and the careful eyes of a woman braced for the moment it would all turn out to be too good to be true. It didn't turn out to be too good to be true. That was the thing Maren watched across those first months with a satisfaction deeper than anything she had felt in the ballroom or the study, or any of the moments of vindication that had once seemed like the point of everything. She watched women arrive braced for disappointment and slowly, week by week, stop bracing. She watched a governess who had spent 11 years being spoken over discover that in the Foundation's teaching room, when she spoke, people wrote down what she said. She watched a companion who apologized before every sentence gradually stop apologizing. She watched the woman from Edinburgh 51 careful quiet, stand up in front of 6 other women one afternoon and teach them a method of double-entry accounting with a confidence that made Maren have to leave the room briefly to compose herself. Phoebe Larkin thrived. She had a gift for languages that no one had ever thought to notice, and within 4 months she was helping to teach French and Latin to women who had been told their whole lives that education was wasted on them, and she did it with a directness that would have been unrecognizable in the girl who had once apologized for existing in her own workplace. Maren did not run the Foundation from a distance. She ran it. She kept its books herself. She made the decisions. She hired the instructors and turned away the 2 potential donors who wanted their names attached to it in ways that would have made the women feel like objects of charity rather than students. She sat in on the teaching. She learned the name of every woman who came through the doors, and she made sure every one of them knew that she saw them. Callum came north often. He had expected he had admitted to her once to feel some version of displacement, to feel the particular unease of a man whose wife had built something entirely her own. Something he was welcome in, but did not run something that did not need him. Instead, he found he loved it. He loved watching her work. He loved arriving to find her in the middle of an argument with an instructor about curriculum, or bent over the Foundation accounts at midnight, or teaching a nervous new arrival how to read a ledger with the same patience he had once watched her apply to a dead Roman sphere. He loved that she contradicted him at breakfast and defeated his arguments after dinner, and occasionally proved his own estate managers wrong, and he loved her more for every instance of it, not despite them. "You've changed," she told him once in the spring, watching him help carry a crate of books into the Foundation's new library. "Have I? When I met you, you'd have solved all of this by now. Bought the property, hired the staff, installed a manager, and considered it handled." She looked at him. "You'd never have let me build it myself." He set the crate down. "I'd have thought I was helping," he said. "You would have. That's what makes it worse." He looked at her for a moment. "You taught me the difference," he said, "between helping and taking over. I didn't know there was one. I thought protecting someone meant standing in front of them." He straightened. "You showed me it sometimes means standing behind them and keeping your hands to yourself while they do the thing themselves. That's the hardest thing I ever asked you to do." "It was," he agreed. "In that ballroom, when he hit you and I didn't move." His jaw tightened at this memory. "That was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, standing still while a man struck my wife." "I know. I did it because you asked me to." "I know." He looked at her. "I'd do it again," he said. "Not because it was easy, because you were right. It was your room to walk into, your story to tell. The best thing I could do wasn't to fight your battle." He paused. "It was to make sure you had a floor solid enough to stand on while you fought it yourself." Maren looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the small distance between them, and she put her hand against his chest, and she said quietly, "That's exactly what you gave me. A floor solid enough to stand on." "Standing room," he said. "Standing room," she agreed. They attended a ball in the autumn. It was in London, in a house not unlike Blackmere House, with an orchestra and 200 guests, and the particular quality of light that grand rooms have when a great deal of money has been spent on making them glow. Maren entered openly as the Duchess of Blackmere. The same society that had once looked through her now turned toward her the moment she entered. The same people who had stood still while a man struck her now crossed rooms to be near her, competed for her attention, spoke of her with the warm proprietary pride of people who wish to be understood as her intimates. She was gracious. She was always gracious now. She had learned that grace cost her nothing and gave her a kind of freedom. The freedom of a woman who no longer needed anything from the people offering her their belated admiration. She moved through the room on Callum's arm, and then she stopped, because across the ballroom near the far wall stood a young woman she did not know. She was perhaps 19. She was wearing a dress that was slightly out of fashion in the way that signals a family that once had money and no longer quite did. She was standing alone with her hands folded in front of her and her chin slightly dropped, and she had the particular stillness that Maren would have recognized in her sleep. No one was speaking to her. No one was even looking at her. She was invisible in exactly the way Maren had once been invisible, present in the room and entirely unseen, occupying the smallest possible amount of space, waiting for the evening to end so she could stop the exhausting work of being unobtrusive. Maren stopped walking. She looked at the grand people waiting to greet her, a countess, 2 members of parliament, a woman who had ignored her at 4 separate gatherings, and now had her hand half raised in eager greeting. She looked back at the girl against the wall. Callum followed her gaze. He understood immediately. He always understood now. "Go," he said. She looked at him. "They'll wait," he said, nodding toward the grand people. "They've got nothing better to do than wait for a duchess." His mouth moved. "She's the one who needs you." Maren let go of his arm, and she crossed the room. She crossed it the way she had crossed a room at Greystone Hall, the way she had crossed miles to sit at a correspondence table with a crying girl, the way she had learned to cross the distance between a person alone in a corner and the simple fact of being seen. The girl noticed her coming and went rigid, the panic of the unobtrusive. When attention arrives, the certainty that she must have done something wrong to draw it. Maren stopped in front of her. "Hello," she said. The girl's hands twisted. "I'm sorry, I don't." "You didn't do anything wrong," Maren said. "I saw you standing here, and I wanted to come say hello, that's all." The girl stared at her. "My name is Maren," she said. And then, because a title would have built a wall exactly where she was trying to remove one, she said it simply, "What's yours?" Across the ballroom. Callum stood beneath the arch of the doorway and watched his wife lean down slightly to hear a nervous girl's name. I thought about another doorway. He thought about a night when he had stood exactly like this, watching across a crowded room. Except that night, he had been watching a man raise his hand to strike the woman he loved, and he had crossed the room because she was in danger. Now he stood in the same posture and watched the same woman cross the same kind of room, but she was not in danger, and she was not being rescued, and no one had struck anyone. She was crossing the room because she remembered. She remembered exactly what it had felt like to stand against a wall and wait for an evening to end. She remembered exactly what it had cost to make herself small. She remembered most of all the precise texture of the loneliness of being in a room full of people and having not one of them cross the floor to reach you. And she had decided quietly, permanently, without any drama at all, that whenever she saw someone standing where she had once stood, she would cross the room. That was the legacy. Not the title. Not the foundation, even though the foundation was real and lasting and would change hundreds of lives across the years to come. The legacy was smaller than that and larger than that. It was a woman who crossed rooms. Callum watched the nervous girl say her name. He watched Maren smile and say something in return, something that made the girl's shoulders drop half an inch, then a full inch, then all the way. Watched the careful stillness begin to loosen. Watched a 19-year-old, who had been braced for the whole evening, slowly understand that someone had crossed a room to see her and did not want anything from her at all. He did not go over. This was not his to do. It never had been. He stood in the doorway, and he watched his wife make sure a girl everyone else had overlooked was for at least one evening entirely seen. And he understood that 6 years of a lie and a slap in a ballroom and a fraud that had nearly buried her had all led finally here. Not to Blaine Wexford's ruin, though that had come and gone and been forgotten by nearly everyone, but to this. To a woman who had survived being invisible and had decided to spend the rest of her life making sure no one else had to. Maren glanced back once across the ballroom and found him in the doorway. Their eyes met. She did not need to say anything. Neither did he. 6 years of everything passed between them in a single look across a crowded room, and then she turned back to the girl and kept talking, and Callum stayed where he was, and the orchestra played on. Real power, Maren had learned, was never making the people who hurt you suffer. It was reaching the point where they no longer had any power to decide who you became. And real love was never, "I will rescue you because you are weak." It was, "I see your strength, and I will stand beside you, or behind you, or across the room in a doorway while you use it." The girl against the wall said something, and Maren laughed a real laugh, easy and unguarded, the laugh of a woman who had nothing left to protect herself from, and the sound of it carried across the ballroom to the man in the doorway, who had once crossed a room to save her, and now understood that the greatest thing he had ever done was learn when not to. Maren Ravenshaw had been the woman everyone looked through. Now she was the woman who crossed the room, and she would cross it again and again for every woman left standing alone in a corner for the rest of her life, because she had learned the one thing that 6 years of being unseen had taught her better than anything else ever could. When someone is alone in the corner, you cross the room. And that was exactly the woman she had become.